Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. That night wasn't supposed to change anything. It was just a long drive, a flat tire, and a sudden downpour that left us stranded in the middle of nowhere. But sometimes, the smallest detours in life lead us to moments we never see coming, moments that make us question what's right, what's real, and what our hearts truly want. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip, me and my stepson, Ethan, driving back from visiting family. The roads were quiet, the radio played soft country songs, and the silence between us felt comfortable. But as the storm clouds rolled in and the wind began to howl, something in that silence shifted. The car sputtered, the engine light blinked, and before we knew it, we were stuck on a lonely stretch of highway with rain pouring so hard we could barely see the road. We tried calling for help, but the signal was dead. The only lights in the distance came from a small roadside motel, the kind you only stop at when there's no other choice. Ethan, always the calm one, offered to check us in. We were soaked, freezing, and exhausted when we got to the front desk. But the clerk had bad news. Only one room left. 2 beds, 1 tiny heater, and a storm outside that wasn't letting up anytime soon. I remember looking at him, his shirt clinging to his skin from the rain, hair dripping down his face, and for the first time, I saw him differently. Not just as my husband's son, but as someone older, more grown than I'd realized. He was 23, responsible, kind, and somehow, that night, it felt like we were both just 2 people trying to find warmth in the middle of a storm. As thunder rumbled outside, we tried to make the best of it, talking about random things, laughing over old memories, sharing snacks we'd brought for the trip. But the longer we talked, the more that wall between us began to fade. There was something unspoken hanging in the air, something neither of us dared to name. When the lights flickered and went out, the silence grew heavier. Just the sound of rain on the window and our breathing. I could feel his eyes on me in the dark, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. But here's where it gets complicated. That night didn't end the way either of us expected. It changed everything, our connection, our boundaries, even how we saw ourselves. What happened in that room? Well, that's the part I've never told anyone before. So before I share the rest, I want to know what you think. Have you ever found yourself in a situation that made you question your feelings or what's right and wrong? Do you believe that sometimes fate brings people together in ways we can't explain? After that night at the motel, nothing felt the same between me and Ethan. It wasn't that something happened, it was what almost did. The air between us had changed. It was heavier, charged with things we didn't say. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, and the world outside seemed normal again. But inside that room, it felt like we'd both crossed an invisible line we couldn't go back from. He was quiet while packing up, his movements careful, like he was afraid a single wrong word would shatter the fragile calm between us. I tried to act normal, smiling, making small talk, pretending that the awkward silence wasn't there, but every glance felt loaded with questions neither of us could ask. On the drive home, the world blurred past in shades of gray. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried that damp chill. I caught him glancing at me from time to time, his expression thoughtful, almost troubled. I wondered if he was thinking the same thing I was, that maybe, just maybe, something in us had shifted. It's strange how one night can replay in your mind over and over again. The sound of the thunder, the way he laughed softly in the dark, the look in his eyes when the lights went out. I told myself it was just a moment, born out of loneliness, exhaustion, and bad timing. But deep down, I knew it was more complicated than that. Back home, life returned to its usual rhythm. My husband was still away for work most days, and Ethan spent his time at his new job downtown. Yet every time I passed by his room, or heard the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, I felt that same quiet pull, the one that made my heart race before my mind could stop it. There were moments when our paths crossed unexpectedly, a quick breakfast before he left for work, a late-night movie when neither of us could sleep. And each time, the air would grow tense again. We both tried to act like nothing had changed, but our eyes told a different story. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if he felt it too, the hesitation, the curiosity, the confusion. The way he would start to say something and then stop. The way his voice softened when he talked to me, like he was trying not to show too much. But the guilt lingered too. It wasn't just about what almost happened. It was about what it meant. I kept asking myself why I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Maybe it was the way we'd both let our guards down. Maybe it was the quiet comfort of knowing someone understood me without words. Or maybe, deep down, I was afraid of admitting that a part of me didn't want to forget. Still, I knew that whatever was happening needed to stay unspoken. One wrong move could destroy everything, our family, our trust, everything we'd built. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the tension only grew stronger. Have you ever felt something you couldn't explain, something you tried to push away, only for it to find its way back into your thoughts? If you've ever been in that place between right and almost wrong, tell me in the comments. Because sometimes, the hardest part isn't what we do, it's what we feel and can't say out loud. And what happened next? Well, that's when things truly began to change. The days that followed felt longer than usual. Ethan and I both pretended to move on, but deep down, something had shifted permanently. It wasn't just awkwardness anymore, it was awareness. Every glance felt too long, every silence too loaded. We'd both become careful around each other, yet there was a strange comfort in that tension, like neither of us really wanted it to fade. One evening, about 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find him fixing the kitchen light. The way he stood there, sleeves rolled up, the glow from the bulb flickering across his face, it made me stop for a second. He smiled when he noticed me watching, that same calm, easy smile he always had. But this time, it felt different. Familiar, yet new. We talked for a while, nothing serious, just small talk about dinner plans and his job. But beneath it, there was that same quiet pull. The more we spoke, the more it felt like we were both trying to fill the silence that had been haunting us since that night. I laughed at something he said, and for the first time in weeks, it felt almost normal again. Almost. Later that night, while washing the dishes, I overheard him on the phone in the living room. His tone was softer than usual, almost uncertain. I caught fragments of his words, something about not being sure how to feel, about things being complicated. My heart skipped. I knew it wasn't fair to assume he was talking about me, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder. The next day, I tried to focus on other things, work, errands, anything to distract myself, but my thoughts kept circling back. Maybe I was imagining everything. Maybe that night meant more to me than it did to him. Or maybe he was fighting the same confusion, trying to find the right way to handle it. Then, one weekend, my husband called to say he'd be away for another week. The house felt emptier than ever, and with Ethan around, it was impossible to ignore the tension any longer. We ended up having dinner together, just the two of us. The conversation started light, but drifted toward that unspoken space we'd both been avoiding. He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "I've been thinking a lot about that night." My breath caught. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. Instead, we both fell silent again, pretending to focus on our food. But that one sentence was enough to stir everything back up, the emotions, the uncertainty, the quiet longing neither of us dared to name. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment in my mind, wondering what he really meant. Was he feeling guilty? Regretful? Or was he trying to tell me something more? The walls of the house felt smaller, the air thicker with questions I couldn't answer. Sometimes love, or what feels like it, shows up in the most unexpected ways. It tests your limits, your morals, your sense of right and wrong. It makes you question what you truly want versus what you should want. And maybe, just maybe, it forces you to see the people closest to you in ways you never did before. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Every time I saw Ethan, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that reminded me of everything we weren't saying. He'd become quieter too, more distant at times, almost like he was trying to protect us both from whatever was building between us. But the silence didn't make it easier. It only made the tension grow stronger. One rainy evening, it all came to a head. The storm outside was almost identical to the one from that night at the motel. Thunder rolled across the sky, wind rattled the windows, and for a moment, it felt like time was repeating itself. I was in the kitchen when the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. My heart skipped. It was impossible not to think of that night again. Ethan came down the hallway with a flashlight, his voice calm but low. "Looks like the power's out again," he said. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing, but the air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said. He placed the flashlight on the table, the soft glow lighting his face, and for a second, we just stood there, not speaking. The sound of rain grew heavier. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The memory of that motel, the dark, the quiet, the closeness, was suddenly right there between us again. He took a small step closer, hesitated, then said quietly, "We can't keep pretending nothing's wrong." His voice was steady, but his eyes gave away the storm inside him. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to end the conversation before it went too far, but another part, the one that had been quietly fighting this for weeks, wanted to finally hear what he'd been holding back. "I've tried to forget that night," he continued, "but I can't." The words hung in the air, trembling between us like a fragile thread. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just admitted. I wanted to respond, to explain everything I'd been feeling, but my throat felt dry. The wind howled louder, shaking the windows. The light flickered again, throwing shifting shadows across the room. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for one of us to speak, to decide what would happen next. But neither of us moved. We just stood there, two people caught between right and almost wrong, between what we should feel and what we actually did. And then, just as he opened his mouth to say something more, a sound from outside broke the moment, a car pulling into the driveway. My husband's headlights swept across the window, cutting through the darkness. The timing couldn't have been worse. I froze. Ethan stepped back instantly, his expression unreadable. The storm still raged outside, but inside, everything had gone silent again, except for the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my chest. What happened in the next few minutes would change everything. The moment my husband's car pulled into the driveway, everything inside me froze. The tension that had been silently building between me and Ethan vanished in an instant, replaced by panic. The sound of the engine cutting off felt louder than the thunder outside. We didn't even have to speak, just one look between us, and we both knew what we had to do. Pretend. Act normal. As if nothing had ever happened. I grabbed the flashlight and turned toward the counter, pretending to be busy when the front door opened. My husband stepped in, shaking the rain from his jacket, completely unaware of the storm that had been raging inside the house long before the thunder started. Ethan greeted him first, his voice calm and steady, and I followed, trying to keep mine from shaking. But something felt off. My husband's eyes lingered on us a little too long. Maybe it was just my guilt, or maybe he sensed the invisible weight in the air. He looked around, then asked, "Everything okay here?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just a blackout. We were waiting for you to get home." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. He went upstairs to change, and for a few moments, the silence between me and Ethan felt unbearable. We avoided each other's eyes, both pretending to focus on anything else. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the echo of Ethan's voice, "We can't keep pretending nothing's wrong." Those words wouldn't leave my mind. And now, with my husband back, the secret we'd been trying to bury suddenly felt dangerous. The next morning, something unexpected happened. My husband left early for a work meeting, but before he did, he mentioned something that made my stomach twist. I talked to the motel owner, he said casually while tying his tie. "He found your jacket there when he was cleaning. Said he'd mail it back." My heart stopped. That jacket. The one I'd left behind in the motel room the night everything changed. I tried to smile, act surprised, but inside, my thoughts were spinning. If the motel owner remembered us or said something that didn't match the story I told my husband, that one small detail could unravel everything. After he left, I went downstairs, my hands trembling as I poured coffee. Ethan walked in a few minutes later, looking just as uneasy. I told him what my husband had said, and his face went pale. He talked to the owner, he asked quietly. What did he say? Nothing yet, I whispered. But if he starts asking questions, I didn't have to finish the sentence. The fear in both our eyes said it all. That day felt endless. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be my husband calling, asking questions I couldn't answer. I couldn't focus, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. The storm that had passed outside now felt like it had moved inside me, loud, chaotic, impossible to escape. When evening came, Ethan knocked on my door. He looked torn, like he'd made a decision he wasn't sure he could live with. If he finds out, he said softly, I'll take the blame. I'll say I misunderstood. I won't let you get dragged into this. The words hit me like a wave, part relief, part heartbreak. He was willing to protect me, even if it meant ruining himself. That's when I realized this wasn't just confusion or guilt anymore. It was something deeper, more dangerous. Something that couldn't stay hidden much longer. And just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, my husband called from the car. His voice was calm, too calm. Hey, he said, I just got off the phone with the motel owner. He said something interesting about that night you two stayed there. My hands went cold. I looked at Ethan, who stared back at me frozen. The line crackled. My husband's voice lowered. We need to talk. That was the moment I knew the real storm hadn't even begun yet. The drive home that night felt endless. My husband's voice on the phone had been calm, too calm, and that scared me more than if he'd shouted. When he finally walked through the door, the look on his face told me everything. He knew something wasn't right. He set his keys on the counter, glanced at me, then at Ethan, who was standing near the stairs like he didn't know whether to stay or leave. The air in the room was thick with things none of us wanted to say. I talked to the motel owner, my husband said quietly. He remembered you two checking in that night. He looked straight at me, said there was only one room left. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to explain, to tell the truth, but which truth? The one that sounded right, or the one that felt right? Ethan stepped forward before I could speak. It wasn't what you think, he said quickly. The storm, there was no signal, nowhere else to go. We just needed a place to stay. My husband's jaw tightened. I didn't say I thought anything, he said. But his eyes told a different story. He turned back to me. I just don't understand why you didn't mention it. That question hung in the air like smoke. I had no answer that wouldn't sound like a lie. The silence stretched on until Ethan finally said, it was my fault. I should have called when the car broke down. I didn't think. That small act, him taking the blame, changed something in the room. My husband's anger faded into something else, confusion, maybe even guilt. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Next time, just be honest, he said quietly. That's all I ask. And just like that, the moment passed. He walked upstairs, leaving me and Ethan standing in the half-lit kitchen, the storm outside finally dying down. But even though the tension broke, the air between me and Ethan didn't. When I looked at him, I saw the weight of everything we hadn't said, and everything we still felt. You didn't have to do that, I whispered. He smiled faintly. I know, but I wanted to. For a moment, it felt like everything could finally settle. But that peace didn't last. Later that night, while cleaning up, I found my phone buzzing with a new message from an unknown number. It was a picture. The motel sign glowing in the rain. Below it, a single line of text, you weren't the only ones there that night. My stomach dropped. Someone had seen us. When I saw that message, my entire body went cold. The picture of the motel glowing in the rain felt like a ghost from a night we both had tried to forget. Ethan was in the living room, scrolling through his phone when I showed him the text. He stared at the screen for a long moment before saying quietly, "Someone must have seen us. Maybe another guest." I wanted to believe that, but something about the message felt personal. Whoever sent it wasn't just curious, they knew. They were warning us. The following day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every sound made me jump. Every unknown number that appeared on my phone made my heart race. But then, late that evening, a new message arrived. This one was from my husband. I talked to the motel owner again, it read. He said someone had been asking about that night, someone who thought they recognized Ethan. My mind raced through every possibility. Who could it be? Why no? When my husband got home, I decided it was time to stop hiding. I told him everything: the flat tire, the storm, the single room, how it was never supposed to be anything more than an accident of circumstance. I didn't tell him about the feelings or the tension, just the facts. He listened in silence. When I finished, he looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "But whoever's doing this, they want to see us fall apart. Don't let them." That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever had happened, whatever anyone thought, the truth, at least the part we could live with, was out. Ethan stayed quiet after that, avoiding long talks or glances that lingered too long. It was better that way. We both knew the line we almost crossed couldn't be erased, but it could stay buried. Weeks passed, and the messages stopped. Life settled back into something that looked like normal. The storm had come and gone, leaving behind lessons we hadn't wanted but probably needed. Sometimes, life tests you in ways you never expect, not with choices between good and bad, but between comfort and truth. Ethan eventually moved out, got his own place in the city. We still talk sometimes, but it's different now. There's distance, but also understanding. A quiet respect that came from almost losing something we both cared about. I still think about that night sometimes, not with guilt, but with reflection. How one unexpected moment can reveal parts of ourselves we didn't know existed. And maybe that's what this story really was, a reminder that love, trust, and temptation often live closer together than we think. If you've ever faced a moment where your heart and your mind didn't agree, what did you choose? Tell me in the comments below. Would you have told the truth or kept it hidden? And if you'd like to see what happens next, let me know if this story deserves a sequel. Summary: a mother and her adult stepson find themselves stranded during a storm, forced to share a motel room for one night. What follows is a quiet, emotional struggle between right and almost wrong, love and guilt, truth and silence. When a mysterious message threatens to expose them, they must face what really happened and what it means for their future.